I'm very excited to introduce our next panel, and specifically the next panel moderator, Professor Jan-Emmanuel De Neve, who will introduce his esteemed panelists. But before that, I wanted to do a quick introduction. Jan is the co-founder of the World Wellbeing Movement, the director of the Wellbeing Research Centre at the University of Oxford, and also a co-editor of the World Happiness Report. With that, I will turn it over to you, Jan.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. I'm not going to be doing a presentation of any kind. We shall get seated very shortly, and I'll simply stick with introducing the panel, the topic, and the amazing two wonderful guests that will be joining us on stage for what I think will be an extraordinary discussion. As I look around the room, I see lots of expertise on workplace well-being, because we now turn towards that subject, which, knowing the expertise in the room, I'm hoping for a very high-level discussion with the experts and the practitioners on workplace well-being in the room. Before introducing our two speakers, I want to highlight, for example, S&P Global, who are here with us, who lead the charge in introducing workplace well-being metrics in their corporate sustainability assessment, which is a major change. I see Richard Barker in the room, who's my dear colleague at Oxford, who's leading the charge with the International Institute for Sustainability Standards, the ISSB board. I see our friends of Indeed, Lafon and Janine, who are currently managing the world's largest study in employee workplace well-being through crowdsourcing at a scale workplace well-being never seen before. I see George Ward and many others who are the real experts on the academic side. Andrew Clark, needless to say, a mentor to all of us, and so on and so forth. So this is hopefully, before I even miss it, the 4-day week global, doing such a fantastic job on the forefronts of trying to change workplace well-being practically by probably the most daring and revolutionary intervention that could well be, which is a shorter work week to try and improve work-life balance. So anybody, so excited, anybody amongst you should really be on this panel. So consider us all one big panel, needless to say. But let me call forward Diana, Han, and Alberto Nobis. And I'll quickly introduce Alberto first, perhaps, before we take the stage. He was a CEO of DHL Europe, now CEO of VTG, which is arguably Europe's largest train freight carrier, and doing an amazing job there trying to push sustainability in addition to workplace well-being. He is one person who leads by example as the senior head of organizations, really imbued with workplace well-being and leading it on the ground. And also, needless to say, a wonderful partner to Karen, having hosted WAHASU last year. So he's really very much part of the family and lives by example. And then let me turn to Diana Han, who's the Chief Health and Wellbeing Officer for Unilever. Diana is a force of nature, for anybody who knows her, and I've got to know her quite well over the last year and a half. She really has the ear of the CEO at Unilever, and across Unilever, a rather large organization spanning the globe, and even larger when you think of all the suppliers that cater to it. She's really pioneering everything possible on workplace well-being in Unilever, the suppliers. But I learned over the last year and a half, not just within Unilever, because when you go to fora like the World Economic Forum or anywhere else, public profiles or platforms where people talk about workplace well-being and mental health, Diana will be the person standing up for this. So thank you, Diana. Thank you, Alberto. That's good to see. Well, I want to get over to wonderful questions from the real experts here in the room, briefly, but I will structure and ask them essentially 3 sets of questions. And I want to do this inspired by Richard, of course, and the notion for moving towards evidence-based policymaking, but also being seated behind this wonderful portrait of the Webbers. And they are all about metrics and policy and influence. And what I want to do is talk about first, how do we define and measure well-being and how they've done it and seen it in the field. Then move on to, well, what have the data and your practical experience on the ground taught you, the understanding bit, from measurement to understanding. And finally, from measurement to understanding to action. And then, obviously, that's where we'll talk about interventions. And I want to test with them which interventions they've seen have actually moved the needle the most on the ground in terms of raising workplace well-being. And I think we'll take it from there, and then obviously it'll be over to you. So Diana, Alberto, Diana first. How do you define workplace well-being in the context of Unilever or more generally? And how do you go about measuring this in practice? And then I'll over to Alberto.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be here and look forward to the conversations. Representing the private sector, I cannot say enough how much I believe businesses have a profound role to play in advancing the broader cause of happiness, well-being for society. And so I would say the first place I would start in answering the question, and by the way, we three have not met, so this is as spontaneous gets. It really docks into what is Unilever's framework for well-being, and it's all about whole person health, whole person happiness, whole person well-being. And so what that means is we focus on the broad spectrum, the holistic 360, as it were, whether it's physical health, which of course during the COVID pandemic for Unilever, a company that operates in 190 countries, with a lot of different kinds of challenges around the world, the burden of chronic conditions, chronic health risks became very, very real in terms of its impact on well-being. But then, of course, it also spans the spectrum of emotional health and well-being. But most importantly, I would say it is Unilever acknowledging that the psychosocial impact of work and work itself as a critical either enabler and an albatross depending on the situation on well-being is where we probably spend the most of our time when I think about this globally, because again, when we operate in 190 countries, as in for real, because of the products we make. And for those of you who don't know, we make products that range from Dove and the Dove brands to beauty products and food and nutrition and some delectables in our ice cream business as well. And so then when it comes to metrics, we have a number of vehicles, but they are all drawn from the validated evidence base. So we didn't sit in a closet, as employers sometimes do, and make up things. We literally said, look, we don't need to do this work. The work has been done by many academics around the world, and so we used a number of vehicles. Now, we do have a bit of a hodgepodge, we'll say, because there are different things that we'll measure at different times. And we deliver these assessments to our people at different cadences. There's the always on, where managers can pull and deploy literally any day of the week in whatever cadence and refresh and remeasure. And then there's our quarterly all-employee checkpoints and then our annual all-employee checkpoints. And we use those surveys to very much form and pivot as needed our global strategies for health and well-being across whole person health and the impact of work and psychosocial risk on health and well-being, and what we as a business need to do, because it's not just about individuals and enabling individual well-being. We do that too, and we can get into that when we talk about interventions, but it's acknowledging that work itself and how we design work, how we deliver work, the sense of agency, autonomy, the sense of connectivity within teams, the cohesion and coherence at work makes a world of difference for health and well-being. So there's a lot more I'll say, but I'll make sure Alberto has a chance to weigh in as well.
Thank you, Diana. Alberto, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm working now for a micro company compared to Unilever, right? So it's around about 45 countries in Europe. is not about 2,000 people. So comparing the size, but I think it's very similar in the way that the first sign to me of defining well-being is the old-fashioned sickness rate, and we tend to, in companies, tend to consider that in terms of productivity, how many people I'm losing every day because they are homesick. But actually, to me, has a much more deeper and more important meaning. It is, okay, if people are sick because it's that they are not feeling well, and there is something that is going beyond, the flu or, anything else that is affecting the physical, body. I personally, in terms of business, I tend to put a lot of attention to that one when I'm visiting countries, organizations, or teams, and et cetera, to understand what is the sickness rate, which is not difficult to get because every day, basically, you know how the people are out. And to me, what is very important is to understand why the people are out. which again, back to the conversation we just saw, it seems to be like an obvious question, but it's not, because if you know your person and you're asking, what's going on, you will discover much more than then you're at home, you cannot be productive. The second thing, I think, very similar to any business today is measuring the level of engagement. In my current company, we're measuring that only once a year, which definitely will change. But I think any survey that any company now in the world is doing is full of, very interesting data. They're asking a lot of questions. I think, of course, we're measuring, all the companies are measuring. Maybe I'm leading to the second question, but, to me, what I found very interesting is, to understand what the people understand about this measure. So the tendency I saw very often is that, managers, they tend to say, okay, well, if I have this issue, I'm going to do this immediately, right? Without trying to understand what is the root causes of what is the question, is coming. But the third element that I in my experience, I found much more interesting, that is a kind of a leading indicator, not a lagging indicator, like, okay, what is the engagement you do once a quarter or once a year, is to measure really the level of participation of your people in building, the solution in the company. So I'm a big fan of any, you can call it lean management practice or whatever it is, putting the people at the center and understand, how much of their, energy is really deployed to build solutions. So, for instance, I found always very refreshing to understand, okay, well, if, every month we have X amount of, innovation or actions in our company, how much of that is really coming bottom up versus top down? And because we tend especially in big organizations, I work for a company working in 220 countries, not 190, there is this tendency, the top management is supposed to deliver, the strategy. But actually, I don't think that's really important. The strategy to me is one of the components of any situation, but is really what personally I'm interested is to understand what the skills of the people is able to deliver. So if any organization, I found that the participation of the people measurement is low, I know for sure the people are not happy, they are not engaged, because, back to the purpose and the agency and the sense of belonging, well, if I'm not able to shape, my organization, I'm not able to decide myself what are the priorities I need to work on, I cannot talk to my customer, I cannot find solutions while I'm here, And personally, in many years I've been working in different sectors and situations. It's not a cliche, but I never saw in any position, in any company, people working just because of their check at the end of the month. And you go from, the most humble job that you can perform, like a truck driver, to a CEO position. I know that people wake up in the morning, because they want to do something, they want to be, helpful. They want to create something that is good, that is probably lasting for them or for somebody else more than just for them. And therefore, I'm very passionate about this concept, to measure what is the level of participation every day that your people have. And it's not difficult, sometimes. It's simply, to measure, if we have 50 action, how much of that is bottom-up driven, or in how many cases you as a manager, you give substance and follow-up to the ideas of your people. Not just collecting, but what you're going to do about it.
Thank you, Alberto, and you clearly already waded into insights and actions, but let me bring us back a little bit. I noticed something that is very important and interesting is sick leave. How many people are, as Alberto moves into an organization or a unit or department, how many people are off sick? And that is already a signal that you can learn a lot from. But am I pleased to know that in terms of health and well-being, we've moved beyond a very poor proxy of health and well-being, that you're also measuring engagement, well-being, and much else. I know at Unilever they certainly do as well. Alberto also said that these indicators are leading indicators, which then will lead eventually, hopefully, maybe even to a discussion around the business case and et cetera. But if it's a leading indicator, and you already hinted at this as well, then we should really be measuring this a hell of a lot more often than maybe once a year. And I wonder, and maybe this will come up in the discussions as well, is do you see a trend now that people are starting to realize just how important it is, or CEOs and people in your position, Diana, are really more aware of it? Do you see a push for more sort of okay, now that we're seeing this as important, people care, it relates to business outcomes, should we not be have more sort of pulse type surveys? Do you see a tendency moving from annual to quarterly and beyond?
Yeah, so we already do quarterly surveys, but we also do literally assessments that can be triggered truly any time, but they are team driven. So this gets back to the construct I was referring to earlier around, yes, there's the roll up of all of our people, the mass roll up, every nook, every cranny that we do on that quarterly and then annual basis. But our team energy assessment is something that our managers can trigger anytime. And typically, we ask managers, and we embed this in manager training, and we embed this in our standards of leadership and our expectations, that when you assume a team, and we, for those who are following the news, there's a lot of change now at Unilever, and there's more change coming. And so it's a very bumpy time. And especially in these times of change, we've had people, it's been a bit of musical chairs, where all managers are expected to launch new assessments. And so, for example, I belong to several teams. I lead my own organization, Global Health and Wellbeing, but I belong to the leadership team as well at Unilever, and I also support and partner many of our business leaders. And so I will trigger or request the team leader of a team I'm a part of, but not leading, to trigger a team energy assessment as we come together. And then we get a team report that literally in an aggregate way says, here are what's going on with the team. And then we block time, 3 hours, to deliberate, review, talk. We formulate a team charter where we literally agree actions, because what might be going on in this team of 3 might be different if, for example, I'm on a team with Sarah and Karen. And so therefore the actions will differ, and it's brought to life organically, it's brought to life with agency, and it's brought to life with very specific expectations around how we have the conversations, and it's all built on a foundation of psych safety, as you know, because we're doing research together on that. But at the end of the day, you know, psych safety is felt permission for candor. And that's hard. That's hard, right? And because there's a lot of interpersonal risk, and it doesn't have to be the kind of, you know, flagrant risk, like I'm going to move you off the team if I don't like what you say, but it's just a lot more of that human interpersonal. What are the cues I'm reading from you if I say things that you may disagree with?
Absolutely. Can I, Alberto, because I know we're all keen to, I think, get into insights from measurement, but I really like the idea of these ad hoc surveys that can be triggered, as you say, when there's need, and that allow for more of a pulse element. Really innovative. I haven't heard that actually before. Really brilliant.
Let's study it together.
Let's see the impact.
We have a lot of data to share.
True. And we've got a wonderful team, eager and willing to dig into it. Insights. These surveys, engagement, or even the sick leaves, or these team sort of pulses, or the quarterly or the annual, insights that have come back to you as senior leaders, anything that surprised you, that stood out? Are there sort of drivers of well-being or engagement or team issues that you wouldn't have expected there to be coming to the fore? So have that experience, the data, anything specific that has taught you that is perhaps out of the ordinary?
If I may, 2 things. So, in my experience, I'm a non-believer, you know, of raising the frequency of pulse check, you know, because always I've been suffering from, you know, data paralysis all my life in management. You know, the tendency is, we need to know more, so we're going to put resources and money in measuring more and measuring more and measuring more. And normally, it's like, again, top down. What I'm a big believer is that the measurement needs to be done daily in 10 minutes with the team, right? So in my experience, what I found, and maybe in other companies call it a different way, but I call it performance dialogue. You know, every manager, I'm talking about really the base management, anybody with people responsibility, the first thing they should check, and this is my experience, what I've done, is, okay, checking with the team how we're doing today. And when I say how I'm doing, is like how you do. But really, not just, you know, to understand what is the emotional energy of the team and whether or not a person is, you know, up for the job, or for whatever reason, you know, as Dr. Murthy said, you know, we are more than our skill set, you know, as a person. So that's to me very important as a post-check, which is retrieving maybe not a lot of quantitative data, but qualitative data. So insights, very quickly, I saw the time. I think the insight is that measurement is important, understanding is important, but at the end of the day, what people are really at is role modeling. As a manager, you know, I do nothing, and I don't need to be perfect, of course, but my role is not really just to listen, but to demonstrate with my action, with my simple action, you know, what I'm expecting for the people, and what is, you know, the behavior that is helping the organization. To me, that's the thing, you know. So the insight to me, Jan-Emmanuel, is always underestimated importance for a leader, not just to use the brain, but to use, you know, everything that we have got, you know, our body, our emotions, our heart, our guts, in demonstrating what we are expecting the people to do.
Thank you, Alberto. Diana, what have you seen come through the data or the experience on the ground that is not perhaps the usual?
Yeah, so what's actually been interesting for me in looking at our data insights is how much what we experience within Unilever mirrors what we see in terms of data coming out of academic research. So as an example, stigma. We know the data externally on stigma. Well, we see very much those kinds of trends still alive and well at Unilever. And that surprises me and surprised me when I first saw it, that we're making progress. It's because for a company that invests as much as we do in institutionalizing and normalizing conversations around health and well-being across the full spectrum, mental, physical, and the psychosocial aspects of it, that stigma is alive and stigma is real. And to Alberto's point, the reason we view it differently and approach it differently is because we know that felt permission for candor is much easier said than done, especially as teams are rotating, changing, evolving, business context changes. And we very much value that data at mass scale, so it doesn't become anecdotal. But of course we know everything has to be brought to life in the context of the team and the team structure. And so the stigma piece is something that we continue to work on. The other piece that's been really interesting, and again, this simply mirrors what exists in the public domain, is the significantly worse well-being that our female colleagues have relative to male. So we see this even in our own data across the board. Every single metric we measure, and I'd love to show you that actually, given some of the work we're doing together, we see that women are faring worse, top to bottom by pretty significant percentages. And so we know, and this has absolutely, because this is data at scale, it's not anecdotal, your team or my team, we are now fully end-to-end leaning into life stages with an initial focus on women's health and women's life stages, but absolutely we will completely ensure that all of our people, so men will absolutely get time in the sun too, but our data tells us from a prioritization point where we need to start, where we go first versus second or third, and so on down the line. And then we've also seen delightfully that our theory of the case, born out of you know, now a big data set, is that psych safety matters, and that teams that are psychologically safe, individuals who are psychologically safe, perform better, are happier, and we retain them longer. So that's pretty powerful.
It is, Diana, certainly is. Wow. Thank you both. Very complimentary insights, I have to say, coming back from your experience in the data. The gender differences is very troublesome and deserves more investigation, needless to say. This brings us then to the third leg, if you will, before heading over to you, is, so what do we then actually do? All of you have been in charge of organizations, units. How has these insights and data led to on-the-ground interventions that may have worked or may not have worked? And so there's lessons to be learned from what has not worked either. Alberto, maybe I can start with you. Anything on the ground that you saw had real impact, or you tried, thought was going to work and didn't?
Yeah, I think, if I try to make a prioritization, what I've seen working to me is really protecting, as you're saying, the environment, you know. So in big organization, typically you have, you know, people having different approach depending on their, let's say, background, but I say also demographic, right? So I think it's not, I think, a secret that the current organization, I think more than ever, they have such a diversity, not in terms of just gender, but, you know, approach to life. So I have a 27 years old and I have a 58 years old, and the approach of life is completely different. And back to the candor and, say, psychological safety and everything, I think especially our young colleagues, our young talents, they are demanding respect from the older talents, because I think we are growing up in an environment that it was assuming that as an elderly, you have the right to impose things, or you have the right to judge, or you have the right to impose a view because I'm simply more experienced. And that necessarily is the best thing to do. So I think what I found very effective is, as a manager, as a you know, senior manager, is to protect the environment and making sure that people from every age and every background, they understand that the world is changing. That you know, it's not just because of your experience, because of your age, or because of your status in the organization that you have the right, you know, to impose your presence or impose your views. And that is potentially extremely powerful on one side, but very difficult. And sometimes, you know, how can I say, yeah, it's taking a lot of courage. Because that means that maybe you will find, as it was in my case, that senior, relatively senior, even more senior managers, they are not equipped with this level of understanding. So your job is not just to, let's say, evaluate what is their contribution in terms of results, but it's also what their contribution in terms of respect. So what Dr. Murthy said before, I recognize a lot in private organization, you know, to protect the social network within the company, you know, so that, because if you have a social network, if you have avenues through which ideas and contribution can, you know, come to fruition, then you have a healthy organization. If somehow the network internally in the company is disrupted, then, you know, is a problem. So that concept of protecting, let's say, the candor, the safe environment, to me is the most important thing, as I found myself being engaged with.
It's interesting what we find, obviously, with the team at Indeed, amongst the drivers that require most work, is that sense of belonging, which is another way of getting at social capital, the ties, and generating a place where you feel like you belong and thus can speak out with the candor that's needed to drive innovation. And so in the most recent analysis run by George and the team run by Janine, we find that amongst all the drivers, that's also one that's the lowest, as it turns out, if you look at the level of these drivers. Diana, over to you.
So from an intervention standpoint, we segment this by the business broadly as an entity, and then at the team level, and at individuals, and within individuals segmented by literally every individual, and then managers, and individual managers knowing the disproportionate impact that managers have on the members of their team. And so as a business, we literally ensure that our senior leaders and our business leaders are always including well-being in some form or fashion, whether it's sharing a well-being moment, a personal practice, and hopefully, Alberto, exactly as you said, hopefully role modeling as well, and because people take cues from, of course, our senior leaders, and embedding that culture, normalizing that culture. So it is okay to speak up, and it's okay to not be okay as well. And then at the team unit, I spoke earlier about how we approach making sure that each specific team has the insights that it needs to facilitate the team conversation about what are the drivers. And what are the things, drivers of things that are going poorly in particular, but also, of course, what are the things that are going well to protect and to dial up and to contract with one another, the ways of working in the culture of the team. And then at the individual level, we have many of the resources that other employers also have, whether it's digitally enabled or human touch enabled, so it's the full complement of resources for physical and mental and emotional well-being. What we do try to do, though, and firmly lean away from is just the concept of running campaigns only. So it's not just rah-rah, here's a booth, here's a health fair, here's one event, I mean, those are important too, but we don't really focus so much time and energy on that as we do the day-to-day longitudinal initiatives. So we don't do many things, but what we do at scale, we do in an evidence-based fashion. And this is such a rich topic, and I know we've got the placard time, it'll soon be time, but I do want to put in a plug for the World Wellbeing Movement's playbook that was just published. The dozen or so interventions there are ones that we have seen over the years be quite evergreen in the evidence base, and every one of those interventions we have absolutely deployed at scale as well. So please do check that out.
Yeah.
And no, Sarah did not ask me to say that at all. That was a surprise. It's because I believe in it, and it's evidence-based.
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, we've got 5 minutes for questions, and while you're thinking of a good question, raising your hand, let me put an additional plug in for the World Wellbeing, the Workplace Wellbeing Playbook in collaboration with our friends at Indeed and the World Wellbeing Movement, because we've really, as an academic team, gone over well over 3,000 academic studies to try and distill the very best of what actually works. And I'm pleased to see some of these will resonate and you're already implementing, but others may inspire action. All right, yes, please.
Thank you so much. Is this on? Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the wonderful conversation and the insights. I'm Dr. Polly Joseph. I'm an investigator at the National Institute of Health in the United States. And you talked about the surveys, and I was just thinking, how do you avoid survey fatigue? One of the things that we often see is that we get so many surveys in our inboxes, and one of the things that many people say is like, oh boy, just one more survey. So how do you avoid that? And to the topic about sex and gender differences, can you speak a little bit more into like, what are you seeing? Because as Dr. Murthy alluded in his presentation, you know, we're complex beings. We bring our home, things that are happening at home, things that are happening in other environments. How do you see that play out in some of the data that you're seeing? And if you can speak to that, and whether that leads to some of those differences that you're seeing, that you mentioned.
Sure. So survey fatigue is something we talk about all the time, because you're absolutely right. We know survey fatigue is real, and we obviously want to avoid it so that we get as much participation as possible. So we have a very simple approach. We keep all of our assessments 5 minutes or less. We literally, when we design them, we actually test them with employees and we time them, and so it's 5 minutes or less. And we only have really about 3 different vehicles that we use that assess the various aspects of whole person health and well-being. So I would say we get spectacular participation. I mean, really spectacular participation. Last year, 92% of our people participated. I mean, that's it's hard to beat that. So we don't see any evidence of it, but it's 5 minutes or less. It's not the 162 questions by any means. And then in terms of gender, what we see across the board, so whether it's questions about physical well-being, whether it's questions about mental and emotional well-being, whether it's questions about psych safety, whether it's questions about work-life balance, whether it's questions about agency. You sort of get my drift now. Top to bottom, in every one of these questions, women are scoring significantly worse than men. So we're going to do something about it. And this, again, mirrors a lot of the external research that's out there. So we know we're not unique, but we hope we can actually do something about it for our people.
Shall we try and get another question in? Or maybe 2? And we've got, do we have room for 3 questions or 3? Okay, we've got 3 questions there. We'll take your questions in one bunch, if you don't mind, and then together we've got 3 minutes to collect them and answer them.
Fast.
All right.
Vanessa King, Action for Happiness. I'm interested in the balance between the corporate responsibility and broader definition, corporate social responsibility, to creating workplaces that support and enhance psychological well-being particularly. But where is the boundary of responsibilities between that and individual well-being? Because, my response to, say, stress may vary depending on what's going on in my life, depending on my kind of, my makeup, whatever. And where is the boundary? Because I've seen it, we came from a history of paternalism, swung the other way to, work is about work, the rest of it's your responsibility. But where are we now and where are we going?
Second question, third question, and over to two of you.
I'm Sood, the former professor at Mayo Clinic, and I design well-being programs for large entities. So my question is about engagement. Almost universally, people who are doing well, they feel they don't need well-being, and people who are doing poorly, they feel like it's not going to help. Nothing is going to help. So how do you enhance engagement? In some of the on-demand programs, engagement is as low as 10%. So that'll be very important to know.
And I'm Amy Blankson from the Digital Wellness Institute, and I would love to hear from you, Diana, about any trends that you're seeing in terms of the shift from the pandemic and Zoom fatigue, impact of technology on the workplace and wellness.
Wow, Diana, Alberto, complex set of questions.
I'd like to start from the last one. Back to the responsibility of all the different components of society. In Europe, I've seen, I'm living and working in Germany because the quarter of my company is in Germany. I've seen this unexpected situation by which what you would expect, the representative of the workers being very conservative. So they want the people to stay home. And I found that extraordinary, counterintuitive. They are trying to protect the idea that, is the interest of the individuals to have more work performed at home opposed to, coming to the office. And I found that, really hard to break. The Zoom fatigue, is something that I think as individuals, we all say, but I found strange that, working council and working institution and trade unions and etc. They're trying to leverage this to say, no, the progressive companies are those who are, facilitating their employees to stay home, which I think is very wrong, right? So I don't know other organizations, but I've been part of these two organizations. I found really difficult with the social counterpart to have a constructive conversation about the importance of building, work as an element of the individual life. So, for instance, I always hated this concept of work-life balance because it means, you are instilling the idea that you're happy if you're not working and you're unhappy if you're working. And all my life I tried to do exactly that one, to prove that to be happy, we want to work and we want to be happy at work. So that is the thing. One, I like to go back to the engagement. How you build engagement, I don't think, is something that you need to be on the top. That's the mistake I've seen in many organizations, that you tend to consider engagement as something you build on the top of their normal routines. Where to me the secret is the other way around, is to weave into your daily routines and operational routines the engagement of the people. As I said it before, so that you're asking your people what is it, and I found this extraordinary correlation between asking the question to the customers, what they want, and allowing throughout the organization the people who are, the front runner of understanding and interpreting the customer needs to translate the customer needs into operational actions that are meaningful for their own processes. That's, to me, the best way to engage. Diana.
Thank you, Alberto. Diana.
Yeah, if I start with the first question around where that calibration is. And avoiding paternalism, that incredibly resonates. And this is exactly why when we think about our construct for well-being at Unilever, it literally is the individual, the team, and then the macro collective entity, and personal mastery and everything that goes into personal mastery, which includes resilience and all these habits that each of us needs to develop. And some of us will require upskilling. That is just a given fact. Not everyone starts from the same place. So personal mastery is one of our leadership expectations. So the conversations we have with our people, the support we give is never about, hey, you know, we're going to put you back in the womb, we're going to swaddle you, and everything's going to be fabulous. Not at all. It is simply, though, acknowledging that when work works, it is one of the best enablers of health and well-being. But we also know it's very easy for work not to work. I think we all probably have individual experiences of that, and so that's the part that we believe Unilever has real accountability around as a collective entity. And then in terms of engagement, absolutely, we think about this all the time, and this is why we don't, as an employer, have a lot of point solution ecosystems where we throw, okay, here's this one thing for sleep, here's, you know, this other thing for women's health in a box only, without in full integrated context. But we try to curate an ecosystem that addresses the sort of top key drivers of well-being challenges we face in our businesses, which is why the macro level data is key, and the ability to cut and segment the data through a number of different lenses is also key. So we know what we have to prioritize as, you know, as granularly as possible, country by country, so we can bring things to life in a culturally sensitive way. And also this is why the team construct is key, because we know people are more successful, the data is clear. Whatever the it is that they are embarking on, if there is a bit of community and collective around that endeavor. So that's one of our approaches. And then in terms of sort of the hybrid world we live in, we know our people value that flexibility. That flexibility question is the top number one scoring domain of our assessments. People value flexibility, and so for us, flexibility means different things. Yes, there's the hybrid work piece, which is 2 days a week for us, and then 3 days wherever you want. But also there's flexibility in terms of how we're designing work and the ecosystem of work and the construct of work. So it's not just the binary, are you physically at work or not at work? It's how we work and the kind of contracting we have with our people as well. So.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this amazing well-being content, like and subscribe to our YouTube channel.